Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Mindy Mandell, and this video is part of a series of videos on Plato's Parmenides. So I'm doing a video on each one of the hypotheses. Now, different people count them differently, but I count 9 hypotheses, and I have already done videos on hypotheses 1 through 5. You can find those on my channel for those who haven't seen them yet. And now we're going on to the 6th. So just a very quick review. I know I've gone over this a few times about how the hypotheses are organized. So for those of you who have been watching all of these videos, 1 through 5, please bear with me as I just run through this quickly. It's a quick review for you. But for those who are coming to this video without having seen the others, let me just briefly point out here that these hypotheses follow the basic order of dialectic. And so we saw that the first hypothesis transcends all of the other hypotheses. And then that leaves 8 hypotheses left, 2 through 9. And for any question that we're exploring, the one or beauty or logos or whatever, we ask if it exists, then what follows? And if it does not exist, then what follows? And so for the question, if it exists, in this case, we're looking at the one. So if the one exists, then there are these 4 questions that we would look at. And we saw in past videos that we can line up the 4 questions with hypotheses 2 through 5. And now we're ready to go on to the hypothesis, what if the one is not? And we have the same basic 4 questions, although of course the 3rd question changes from looking at it in light of the one existing to looking at it in light of the one not functioning. And what we're going to see is that hypotheses 6 through 9 line up with these 4 questions. And because the questions are basically the same as the previous 4, we're going to see there's a certain parallel between hypotheses 2 and 6, 3 and 7, 4 and 8, 5 and 9. Okay, with that brief review, we're going to go on now to the 6th. So we're asking if the one is not, then what could we even say about the one? What follows for the one in and of itself? How can we even say anything about the one if it is not? And that's what Parmenides is going to, explore in the 6th hypothesis. So here's how it begins, and it starts at 160b, and again, I'm staying with the Fowler translation. So Parmenides asks, ought we not next to consider what must happen if one does not exist? What then is the sense of this hypothesis if one does not exist? I mean, does it even make sense? And is it different in any way from this question? What if not one does not exist? And now he's going to give some examples and say that if a person should say, if greatness does not exist, or if smallness does not exist, or anything of that sort, would he not make it clear that in each case, the things he speaks of as not existing is different? Greatness is different from smallness. The one is different from many, and so on. So whatever it is you're talking about that doesn't exist, it is a thing that doesn't exist, and is different from other things. So in our case, does he not make it clear that he means when he says, if one is not, that the thing which is not is different from other things? And do we not know what he means? Now here we're using know in a rather loose way because we may not know exactly what the one is, but we know it's different from greatness or smallness or many or so on, other terms that we can plug in there. So we know that much about it. So then there are 2 things that we can say clearly, that in the first place, he speaks of something which is known. And again, we're using this a bit loosely. In the Republic, he does use the word knowing in a more precise way. It's only the things, the absolute realities in the upper world of the allegory of the cave. It's not the world of the cave. There's no knowledge, technically speaking, in the cave. Although we, of course, colloquially, we talk about things that we know in this world. And so that's more of the way he's using it here in that more colloquial way. So in the first place, he speaks of something which is known. And then the second thing is that it's something different from other things. When he says one, whether he adds to it that it is or that it is not. For that which is said to be non-existent is known nonetheless and is known to be different from other things, is it not? So if we accept these 2 things, that it's known and that it's different from other things, then here's what follows. So in the first place, this must be true of the one, that there is knowledge of it. Again, it's a bit loose the way he's using the word knowledge, but there's knowledge of it. Or else not even the meaning of the words, if the one does not exist, would be known. It wouldn't make sense. Like you can plug in a Dr. Seuss word and suddenly it doesn't make any sense at all, but you have some idea of the one. And so you have some concept, and that's what he's plugging into here. So he's not talking about the one of the first hypothesis or even the second. Okay, so now we are in the sixth. And then the second thing is that there's a difference that belongs to the one in addition to this knowledge. So remember, there were two things, that it's known and that it's different from other things. When we say that the one differs from the others, we speak of a difference that's in the one, not in the others. Now, if you have difficulty wrapping your mind around this one, maybe just think of it grammatically. If the one differs from the others, then differs is an active verb. It's the one that's doing the differing, and that's what he's saying here. Now, the non-existent one partakes of that and some and this in relation to this and these and all such notions of that sort. For the one could not be spoken of, nor could the things which are other than one, nor could anything in relation to the one or belonging to it be or be spoken of, if the one did not partake of the notion some and those other notions. And so we have to be able to talk about it. So we use these sorts of terms like that and some and this in relation to this. Now, the word partake here is metike, which in the Greek word is metike, which is often translated as participate. So it's the same word here. So this translator uses partake. So we have to be able to talk about it. And so he's just stressing that point a little bit more here. It is impossible for the one to be if it does not exist, but even though it doesn't exist, nothing prevents it from partaking of many things. Indeed, it must do so if that one of which we are speaking and not something else is not. So this is the one that is not. And so therefore we can talk about it. It must participate or partake in all these various things that he has brought up so far. Now, if non-existence is the property of that one and not the property of something else, then the one must partake of that and also of many other attributes. And let's see where he goes from here. Now he's going to bring in some of the categories that we've seen in hypotheses 1 and 2. It will possess unlikeness in relation to other things. For the things which are other than one, being different, will be of a different kind. Then if they are unlike the one is evidently unlike the things which are unlike it. So there's this reciprocal relationship here, right? Apples are unlike oranges, and oranges are unlike apples. Then the one possesses unlikeness in relation to which the others are unlike. But if it possesses unlikeness to the others, then must it not possess likeness to itself? And now to make this point, he's going to show the absurdity of if it were unlike itself. If the one possesses unlikeness to the one, here's what would follow. Our argument will not be concerned with that which is of the nature of the one, and our hypothesis will not relate to the one, but to that something that is other than the one. If it's unlike itself, then our hypothesis is about that thing that it's unlike, which doesn't make any sense. So he says that is inadmissible. It's absurd. So then the one must possess likeness to itself. And neither is the one equal to the others. For if it were equal, then it would both be and be like them in respect to equality, both of which are impossible if one does not exist. And since it is not equal to the others, they cannot be equal to it, can they? So again, that reciprocal quality. And so the things which are not equal are unequal. And things which are unequal to something which is unequal to them. Again, apples and oranges, they're unequal to each other. So now he's bringing greatness and smallness, because if we're talking about being unequal, then it has to be either greater or less. So greatness and smallness are the constituents of inequality. Then the one, such as we're discussing, must possess greatness and smallness. Now surely greatness and smallness always keep apart from one another. then there's always something between them. So you might want to think of it as like a continuum with greatness on one end and smallness on the other. And so there's always something, they're separated from each other. But can you think of anything between them except equality? So if you were to move along that continuum, at some point you're going to pass from greatness into smallness or vice versa. So you have to pass through the equal, he's saying. So we already said it's unequal, but now he's showing that there must be equality there too if it has both greatness and smallness. And anything which has greatness and smallness must also have equality, which is between the two. Then the non-existent one, it appears, partakes of equality and greatness and smallness. And now he's going to bring back existence into the conversation. It must also, in a way, partake of existence. We saw this a bit in the beginning. Now we're going to see how he's going to work it in again. Now the word existence here in this part here is ousia. And ousia I've talked about in some of my past videos. This is that quality of that intellectual, vital quality of turning on itself and knowing itself. And so now we have something very curious, that the sixth hypothesis one, the one that is not, somehow participates in this turning about. And that should strike you as odd. How is that possible that a one that is not participates in this quality? And so let's see what he does with this. It must be in such conditions as we have been saying, for if it were not, we should not be speaking the truth in saying that the one is not. And if we speak the truth, it is clear that we are saying that which is. Am I not right? Now he's connecting what is with truth. Then inasmuch as we assert that we are speaking the truth, we necessarily assert that we say that which is. So again, connecting truth with what is. Then, as it appears, the non-existent one exists. For if it is not non-existent, but it gives up something of being to not being, then it will be existent. It's a rather cumbersome sentence, but basically he's saying that if you were to bring in the double negative, saying it is not, rather than saying that it is non-existent, it is not non-existent, then you're bringing in the double negative and they cancel each other out. Then, if it does not exist and is to continue to be non-existent, it must have existence of not being as a bond. Just as being has the non-existence of not being in order to attain its perfect existence. Now, this is a very troubling sentence, very hard to understand, and I think that many people want to just kind of skip over this sentence. However, I would say that if there is only one sentence in all of the six hypotheses that you study and understand, it should be this one. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this one. I'm going to start going backwards, looking at perfect existence. So if you look at absolute being, intelligible being, if you think of like we often diagram the unfolding of reality as like a triangle. And at the very top of it is the purest of being that is most unified. And that being has absolutely no not being in it. It is pure being. And so it has the non-existence of non-being. There's no not being in it. And that's what gives it its pure existence. But let's look now at the first part here, because this is really what the sixth hypothesis is about. It does not exist and it continues to be non-existence. It must have the existence of not being as its bond. Why must it have a bond? Well, we've seen in metaphysics that anything that exists must participate in unity. Everything has a unity to it. And I will link some videos at the end for those of you who haven't seen those videos and are not familiar with this idea. I talk more about it in more detail in some other places, so I'll link those videos at the end. But basic idea here is that for anything to exist, it must have a certain unity as what it is. For example, this remote control, it exists as a remote control because there is a unity to the parts. If I were to take it apart and just lay all the parts out, it no longer exists as a remote control. And same with any other thing, my phone or Even this cup, if it were to break into many pieces, each piece is a piece of glass, but it doesn't exist as a drinking glass anymore because it doesn't have that unity to it. So anything that exists must have a unity. Now, what is this non-existent one that has the existence of not being as its bond? A very simple example might be something like the Marvel comic world or the DC comic world. You can choose which one you like better. It doesn't matter. The point is that we have to suspend our disbelief. We agree to accept the existence of this non-existent world in order for it to exist and for us to enter into it and enjoy it. Now, it has that not being, that falseness about it. It's not real, but we accept that. And so the existence of that non-being is what allows it to be and to continue to be non-existent. Maybe a more meaningful example for us as students of philosophy is to think about our false beliefs, whether they're false beliefs about the nature of reality. And the sixth hypothesis is focusing on the one that is not. So if you are in the sixth hypothesis, you're believing that the world of the cave is all that is real and the upper world is not. And so you're in the cave only, and for that to continue to exist, you have to accept the belief that this is all that is. Maybe our false self-images is easier to talk about here because look at your daydreams. That's a really good example, I think, of what he's saying here. And he's showing us the metaphysics, really, of our daydreams. They exist because there is a false image at the root. If you've never studied your daydreams, I do recommend that you do so because that will really help you better understand how your own mind works and why you jump to daydreams. And it can maybe even help you focus better because you can start to push some of these images away. And what you will find when you study your daydreams is that at the root of every daydream is a false image. And very often these false images are what we would deem negative images. Like, for example, maybe a person sees herself as socially awkward. Now, the existence of that false belief, the existence of the non-being of that belief, because it's not real. Remember, truth and being are connected. So what is false lacks being to that degree that it's false. So it's our false beliefs are not being. But the existence of that false belief is the bond that holds the daydream together. It's what allows it to continue to function as a non-existent image. It's not real. It's not the true self. It's a self-image and it's false. And our daydreams only exist because we hold on to that belief. Once you see through that belief, once you're able to throw it away and you no longer identify, in this case, like as that person who's socially awkward, the daydream disappears. You can't go back into it again. You'll find, test it, look at yourself and you'll see that this is true. And by the way, sometimes we will, our daydreams might be about seeing ourselves interacting with people as that socially awkward person, for example, like to continue with this example. And those daydreams can be uncomfortable, but they kind of repeat over and over. And that's that ousia, that turning on itself. It participates in that turning. Our soul turns it on itself over and over because we're accepting the existence of that non-being, of that false image, and that allows it to continue to exist. And so that's where ousia fits in. And so we feed it over and over, even though it's uncomfortable. Sometimes we also flip it. We may have fantasies where we are seeing ourselves as the opposite of the way we truly feel, where we are being graceful and fun in the center of attention. But it's because, again, of that existence of that self-image of being socially awkward that this daydream is attractive. Once you truly drop the self-image of being socially awkward, then even that fun fantasy isn't going to be all that appealing anymore. So this is what he's saying here. He's giving us the metaphysics behind our false beliefs. Now he's going to take it a step further. In this way, the existence of the existent and the non-existence of the non-existent would be best assured when the existent partakes of the existence of being existent and of the non-existent of not being non-existent, thus ensuring its own perfect existence, and thus the non-existent also secures its perfect non-existence. Easy, right? Okay, it's a very confusing sentence, but I'm just going to focus on this part right here. The existent partakes of both the existence of being existent and the non-existence of not being non-existent. In other words, both the one that is and the one that is not participate in existence in ousia. Excuse me. A lot of talking here. Okay, so that's what he's saying here. And actually I'm going to go back to this for a moment. I think what's significant here is that he is saying that in order for the non-existent to exist, in order for the sixth hypothesis to exist, the world of the cave, there has to be the world outside. So in other words, if you want to deny the second hypothesis and be solely in the sixth, he's saying that's an absurdity, because in order for the world of the cave to exist, there has to be the second hypothesis, the upper world. Think of it this way, that in order for a shadow to be cast, there has to be a light that is shining on the object that is casting the shadow. In the allegory of the cave, and this is in the Republic, for those of you who haven't read the Republic, I definitely recommend it. It's an amazing dialogue. And in book 7 of the Republic, we get the allegory of the cave. You have prisoners who are chained, and in such a way that they're staring at shadows on a wall, and this is all they know. This is their reality. But there are actually items behind them that are casting these shadows, and then there's a fire behind those items that is the power that is casting those shadows. Now, if you were to look at that allegory ontologically as the realms of being, then you would see that the items that are casting shadows, those represent the realms of nature and the reason principles of nature, and the fire represents the realm of soul, which gives that power. That's the truth, the power that casts the shadows in the wall. Then is like our physical world, that is the passive receiver of these reason principles. And so there has to be that fire, that realm of soul, and the soul gets its power from the realms above. And so you have to have those that reality beyond the physical world in order for those shadows to be cast. And so you can't have the sixth without the second. And so he's showing the absurdity of believing that this physical world is all that is real. And you can also see this, with your false beliefs, that you can't have a self-image if there's not a self that is casting a shadow that is distorted. So there's a lot to do here. So there's really, he's giving us a lot of homework, and you will get as much out of it as you put into it. So the more you think about this and apply it to your own false beliefs, your own self-images, your own false beliefs about the nature of reality, you will start to see more into the sixth. It's really an amazing hypothesis. Then since the existent partakes of non-existence and the non-existent of existence, and here again, the existent he's talking about here is false belief. It participates in non-existence because there's something about it that's not true. And it also, as non-existent, it participates of existence, which is what we just talked about. So since it does not exist, necessarily it partakes of existence to attain its non-existence. Clearly then the one, if it does not exist, it has existence. It is non-existent. Very similar to the sophist as well. That was discussed there as well in Plato's sophist. The non-existence also, if it does not, and it also, participates of both existence and non-existence, because it does not exist. There's something false about it. Well, can anything which is in a certain condition be not in that condition without changing from it? So now that we've accepted that it both participates in existence and non-existence, we're going to see some of the absurdities that follow from that, or some of the things that follow. If there's a change between existence and non-existence, then that's motion. And did we not see that the one both is and is not? Then we see that it both is and is not in a given condition. And we have seen that the non-existent one has motion, since it changes from being to not being. But if it is nowhere among existing things, and it is nowhere if it does not exist, then it cannot move from any place to another. So it's not that form of motion. So its motion cannot be a change of place from point A to point B. Nor surely can it turn in the same spot, for it nowhere touches the same. For the same is existent, and the non-existent cannot be in any existing thing. Then the one, being non-existent, cannot turn in that in which it is not. So there's two forms of motion that have both been canceled out. It doesn't move from point A to point B, and it doesn't turn in the same spot. And the one, whether existent or non-existent, it cannot change into something other than itself. For if it changed into something other than itself, then our talk would no longer be about the one, but about that something else, so it doesn't alter either. But if it neither changes into something else, nor turns in the same spot, nor changes its place, can it still move in any way? Those are the only kinds of motion, he's saying. So that which is without motion must keep still, and that which keeps still must be at rest. So first he argued that it's in motion, and now he's saying it's also at rest. So the non-existent one is both at rest and in motion. And if it is in motion, it certainly must change in its nature. For if anything is moved in any way, insofar as it is moved, it is no longer in its former condition, but in a different one. And so there's all this confusion. It seems like all these arguments, they're following the logic, and yet it seems like we're just going back and forth with the same things. In moving, the one changes in nature. And yet, when it does not move in any way, it will not change its nature in any way. Then insofar as the non-existent one moves, it changes. And insofar as it does not move, it does not change. And must not that which changes come into a state of being other than its previous one and perish, so far as its previous state is concerned? Whereas that which does not change neither comes into being nor perishes. We've seen this language before. This is the language of our physical realm, the realm of becoming, the realm of generation, things coming into being and perishing. And so we're saying that these false beliefs both come into being and perish and do not. And so here's how he ends the sixth hypothesis. The non-existent one, the one of the sixth hypothesis, when it is changed, it comes into being and perishes. And when it is not changed, it neither comes into being nor perishes. And thus, the non-existent one both comes into being and perishes, and it neither comes into being nor perishes. And this is the nature of our false beliefs, that they're constantly rising. We're feeding ourselves on them over and over. That's that ousia. We're constantly seeing them. They come to be. A daydream pops up, a certain image pops up, something triggers it, that it comes into being, it perishes. We tell ourselves this is nonsense, I'm pushing that away. It comes into being, it perishes over and over again, and yet it's false. And so it doesn't really come into being or perish. And that is the nature of false belief. And actually, if you go through all of the six hypotheses and look at all the things he says about it being in motion and unlike and equal and unequal, if you apply the idea of false belief to it, you'll start to see more deeply into what he's saying at each of those places. Without doing that exercise, it just feels like a lot of clever wordplay. And so you do have to do the work. And again, you'll get out of it what you put into it. So I encourage you to do that. And you're welcome to write to me if you have any questions or comments, or put them below in the comments section. There is also an email address at the bottom of the description box. And as always, if you like what you're seeing, if you find this video helpful, please take a moment to hit the like button. It really does help. And if you don't already subscribe, I do hope that you will consider doing so. And my next video then will be on the seventh hypothesis. So I do hope you'll join me for that. Thank you very much.